Hello, my name is Sam McKinnon, and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. Welcome to the 9th annual Oral History Program, Our Stories Celebration. The 2012-2013 U.S. History and Modern World History classes worked very hard with Dr. Johnson and the many veterans, Holocaust survivors, civil rights movement protesters, and others across Memphis, Tennessee, who allowed us to interview them this year. We enjoyed hearing their stories and learning more about history than what we could learn from a textbook. For those that gave us permission, these interviews will be submitted to the Library of Congress. They will be on the library's database. This year's program will include montages of clips from the interviews that were done this year and 2 student-created documentaries that use clips from those interviews as primary sources. The students will also come up and relate how the oral history interviews they did intersected with the history they learned in the classroom.
Hello, my name is Ray Patrick, and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. Our stories will celebrate the 36 oral history interviews and 1 special tribute interview that was done this year. Those stories that students have collected have expanded from our interviews of veterans to include stories from those who participated in the civil rights movement and those who survived the Holocaust as well.
We had students interview a Marine who hit the beaches of Iwo Jima during World War II, and a survivor of the horrors of the Auschwitz death camp, Korean War veterans who saved lives on the battlefield, a tunnel rat in the Vietnam War, the local secretary for the NAACP who helped desegregate many of the places in Memphis, and many others. We even had some students interview a man who not only served as a Vietnam veteran, but also as the doctor for James Meredith, General Douglas MacArthur, General William Westerland, and Bob Hope. One of our civil rights interviews was of one of the investigators into the James Earl Ray case on the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We got to hear his take on the forensic evidence that was used to convict James Earl Ray of Dr. King's murder.
Students worked hard this year to prepare real research interview guides using the resources available in the Lausanne Library and its online databases. They then went and interviewed 36 amazing people. They also went to create National History Day projects where they took primary sources in history and came up with their own synthesis of what happened, incorporating the interviews that they did. We are here today to celebrate those interviews and the courage of the people who shared their stories with us.
And now we will have a montage of clips from just a few of the many World War II veteran interviews we did this year. This montage was put together by Lausanne senior Samantha Johnson.
You said you went to the camp for when we got it. How long did that last?
The boot camp? Our boot camp, I think, is like 6 or 8 weeks, but I'm not sure of that.
What was the basic training like?
Hawthorne was good duty. The biggest thing that happened while I was there, besides me catching scarlet fever, was 2 things. While we was, the last week is in boot camp or in the Navy is, you always are taking boat training. 1 week of boat training.
next time we go in, we have to pick them up, murder and wounded. Their feet were shot off with shell shock, their some were blind, and horrible. Really terrible. I don't care who that's it, terrible. That's something nobody wants that can get around. And I saw men, one. I saw men stacked up like cordwood. They were all over the bed out there. And every Japanese was having quickly pulled down. You see his butt was found. Because they had a battle flag around there, they wore around their waist. And they kept on, they wanted that battle flag as a souvenir. So, then as the water came up and tide came in and washed them out, and they were floating all over the place. We had to go out with boats. It was terrible. You get to the point where you work 24 on and about 12 off, and get to the point where life doesn't mean much. I mean, you're not scared then. You just walk right into it.
Second day, they shoot both shoulders, all kinds of shots. Both shoulders, well, they're sore. Now, the third day, he had was a rifle range. And it used a 30-06, it just seemed like a new one. You just held it that long, you know. But that was hard. It just got it.
Because you got those shots that was killing.
Sore, that thing was like, I qualified the first time in it.
That's good, that way on.
Of course, in a lot of training, one thing is in boot camps, you have a ropes from where the blood goes, about 100 feet long. You have to handle most guys slip off. I didn't.
Luckily.
It's funny. One thing that in boot camp was interesting because you had to climb a rope and your hand 20 feet high without your feet touching the rope. To get out of boot camp, it took me 6 weeks to do it. I didn't have any arm strength.
You gained it real quick, didn't you?
It took me 6 weeks. You had to get your feet touched and go back down and start over. It's rough. It's to toughen you up and get used to seeing someone in the big bucket kind of scene. So it's not a life I would wish on everybody. There's some guys I've seen out there that they have to put a boot camp for a while. Some of them need straight out.
Are you happy that you're able to say, like, I've been in the military?
I'm glad I was there. I learned a lot. And I appreciate the military more than I did before. You see what they live with, what they don't with. It's good. It's good for anybody being trained. Besides, the distance is good for anybody to especially in the military for years. I recommend it. I went into the Navy on D-Day in 44, June 6, 1944. You heard of D-Day?
Yes.
That's the day I had the Navy.
What was that like, being drafted on that day?
Any day was bad. Under duress. Invited by the president to join the military service. In fact, I almost got assigned to a limited service in the Army at the place where they examining us. They had the forms laid out on the table, and I heard one officer say, well, we put an Army limited service. And about that guy showed up and grabbed the paper because I had 2 years as an electronic, I had a license, commercial license, first class license. And I'd been studying electronics since I was a kid. I didn't want to go on days. I mean, the Army, so I put them in, I got this negotiate. So they found it to me.
Did you get to actually use your degree toward, like, when you were in the Navy?
In the Navy 2 years.
No, did you get to use your degree that you earned from Southern Methodist?
Well, they didn't do that. They start you as a boot in boot camp. You start the lowest level, actually, next to the lowest level in boot camp. You go where that license doesn't count in the Navy. It's just the knowledge they have.
I was still doing what I just described. happened when the war ended, and I think it was it August of 45, whatever month it was. And at that time, shortly thereafter, that we were informed that we would be discharged. And I was actually discharged in October, on the 31st of October, 1945.
And that was after we'd gone from Japan as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And how did you feel about that? Were you happy or disappointed about that?
I think I was being a kid, I was a little disappointed that I didn't fly. But I was really happy to, since I wasn't going to get to fly, to go ahead and get this to us.
Now we will hear from some students on what it was like for them to interview World War II veterans. Some of these students went on a field trip to a retirement community near Lausanne called Kirby Pines Retirement Community to interview a number of veterans there who were interested in sharing their stories. Others interviewed relatives and family friends.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Arnautic, and I'm a sophomore here at Lausanne. When I interviewed Mabel Beck, a recruiting sergeant in World War II, I learned a lot about women in the Army. Although they could not fight in open combat at the time, it still gave me an insight into women's roles at this time in history. They were a very important part of the war, although they did not fight directly, possessing more of a behind-the-scenes role instead. Mrs. Meck really explained her role in the Marines and her experiences to me when we sat down and talked. Talking to her was very interesting because I got a woman's perspective of war, which is something you do not usually hear. I did not know much about how the Marines worked before the interview, but Mrs. Meck was very patient and kind to me while explaining everything. She was very eager to explain her experiences, and for that I am thankful. Mrs. Meck described the training camps and different conditions they were put under that differed from men. Her main job was to sit in various post offices and answer questions from the soldiers going to or coming back from combat. She also typed men's papers, typing data about their families and anything that was pertinent to that particular Marine. She was very enthusiastic about her job in the Marines and seemed to thoroughly enjoy it. She also traveled to work in Germany after the war and described some of the interesting ramifications of the war on that country after Hitler, so that was very interesting to hear about as well. Now, with her help, I'm more knowledgeable about the military and specifically about women in the Marines. Although she remained in the United States during the war, she had a very important job. Her willingness to help her country and bravery to do whatever she could makes me hope that I can one day help my country as well.
Hello, my name is Andrew Bates, and this is Alex Teepee, and we are juniors here at Lausanne. While this is our first time doing the oral history project, I speak for both of us when I say that we wish we had been able to participate last year as well. Being able to hear historical events from a person who experienced himself really brought to life the history in a way that nothing else really can. It helped us to understand the war a lot better when we knew the thoughts that were going through people's heads at the time. For our project, we interviewed Buster McGuire, a World War II veteran who fought in the Pacific Campaign against the Japanese. He told us what it was like to transport fellow soldiers to and from islands by boat to send them against the Japanese. He spent his whole time in the Navy with these men, from training to sending them onto the islands. That struck something inside us, how hard it must have been to send his friends against the Japanese and not know if they would be coming back. This opportunity to interview Buster changed the way we look at history and let us see it through the eyes of someone who was there.
One of the veterans we had scheduled to be interviewed this year, Tom Williams, passed away right before two of our students, juniors Lyndon Warren and Ringer Sewell, gave us a chance to speak with him. After getting over the initial shock when they heard the news of Tom's death, Lyndon and Reem were so moved by this sudden turn of events that they made a special tribute video for Mr. Williams by doing an oral history interview with his friend, Rick Clossy, about Tom's life. This video was played at Mr. Williams' funeral, and the family was very appreciative of what the girls did. We have a couple of clips from this video that we would like to play for you now.
I think the best picture of this, I knew Tom Williams for the last 20, called the 101st Airborne. The 101st Airborne was famous because of a holding engagement they fought in a place called the Ardennes Forest in Belgium. You see, we thought the war in Europe was over, and the Germans didn't know it was over. It wasn't over in their mind. In the dead of winter, they did something that hadn't been done in 100 years. They launched a major offensive operation to drive the U.S. out of North Europe. And it was going to be through Belgium. So the 101st Airborne was in Bastogne, and they were surrounded. The Bastogne was under siege, and it was the dead of winter. So Tom was cold, probably wet, tired, hungry, and sick, like any other soldier in the infantry at that time. But they were so well trained, morale was such that they held out and continued to fight and hold the town of Bastogne, because if Bastogne were captured, the Germans would go straight to the port of Antwerp. You could control the port, you control all the sea lanes. So very important, what we call strategic objective. So Tom was the 101st at Bastogne. The 101st was later relieved by General George Patton's Third Army. But he stayed in the Army until his retirement, over 30 years. And they retired to this area where he worked with the Scotch Society. He was one-time commander of the Scottish American Military Society, which is a veterans organization. And a long-time volunteer at the VA hospital where he spent a lot of time. Because, getting all those wounds and everything, later on years, really doesn't toll like the body. And so, when the bullets bayonet or wherever we are in our lungs, we start to get a lot of wound. We start to come back the body. And so Tom was in and out of hospital, but he was always there.
And now we will have a montage of clips from the Holocaust survivor interviews we did this year. This montage was put together by Lausanne Jr. Zach George.
What is your name?
Frida Weinrich. Frida Gola Weinrich. My maiden name is Gola. G-O-L-A.
France and Britain, the Allies, did not come to Poland's aid when they were originally invaded.
It was a blitzkrieg. You didn't have time to think. 3 days they were in lodge. So then in Warsaw took a little longer, maybe not quite 2 weeks. Then they did a longer fight by stretching. This was by the entrance to the sea, to the Baltic Sea. This was a little longer. This was the war which supposedly Hitler started the war because he wanted, you see, the Polish map was, here was Germany, here was Prussia, and here was a corridor which Poland had Danzig, Gdansk, and Gdynia to the sea. And Hitler said he wants to unite Prussia with Germany. This was supposed to be the excuse to start the war.
Did you have any siblings growing up?
Oh yeah, I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Nobody survived.
How do you feel with, like, the president of Iran saying the Holocaust never happened, being a survivor of the Holocaust? us. How do you
How I feel that he's a big liar. I don't think that he really thinks that it didn't happen. He just said it, because how can he say that President Eisenhower, he liberated the camp, there are liberators who saw it, there are still people around, of course, I don't know how long, but there are still people around which can testify that it happened. So how can he say? He probably just lies, but he, inside himself, he probably knows that it happened. The Germans even admit that it happened. So how can he say that it didn't happen? If the world is not safe, I hope that this will give a lesson that it will never happen again.
First, when the Germans came to Poland, when they occupied Poland, the Germans came 1939 and September 1st, and everything changed, the whole life changed. See, they occupied Poland in one day. First we heard that the bombs was around, we don't know what was going on. But then we found out the Germans throw bombs and everything. And like I say, we live in a nice neighborhood, only 3 Jewish families live there. And then later, they make us go together. We had a curfew, we could not go, the Jewish people, like till 8 o'clock. After 8 o'clock, we have to be home. And everything changed around. They make us like slaves, worse than slaves. Then me and my family was together still. And they make us go together and clean up everything, the streets were clean. So one time they took out 21 boy. He tried to kill the SS. He don't succeed. Then they took 20 boys, they've been 18 years old. And in front of them, we have to watch how they're killing them. It was snowing that day. And we don't have much clothes on us, so they make us put it on top. And they say no food, nothing that day. And one German, he was passing by me, and he said to me, if I pass by, you can put your hands down.
Break. In Auschwitz, the first day, of course, in the morning they gave you coffee. You had to stand one until the other, about 8 or 10 people. They gave you a big pail of coffee, and the first man got a drink. He gave the pail to the next guy had to get a drink. All right? That's the way it was. Then the soup time at 12 o'clock, they gave the soup. The same thing, you had to stand 10 and one behind the other. The first guy started drinking the soup without anything, spilled the half over. The second man stopped hollering, you know, hungry pizza. Lucky I was in Auschwitz, I don't know if I ate one time. Next to the other. And I said, I'm not going back on that train because I believe that the war is coming to an end. Because we never seen any planes. We knew that the Germans going deeper into Germany, but they didn't want us to leave as witnesses. They thought they would take us deeper into Germany. So we got into the deep forest, we lay down on the ground, we covered ourselves up with the blankets. We said, we lay here, we're not going till whatever it will be. We lay there for over 2 days. Without food, without anything. It was raining, we were wet. That boy who was with me, he said, listen, I'm going to have to tell you my name, because if you get to live through this situation, I might have family looking for me, I cannot take it because I'm dying. I said, no, you're not going to die here. Well, I was strong enough. I coached him. I said, come on, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We don't hear any bombing, any shooting going on right now. Maybe we came to this side, we're going to go out the other side. So we dragged ourselves to the other end, and across the road was a farmhouse, a large farmhouse. There was a soldier moving back and forth with a rifle on it. We raised our hand like we didn't know what kind of soldier it is. So he motioned to put the hands down. So on his arm I see an American flag. So I knew we had survived. I cannot, every time I think about it, I cannot. So that's how we survived. They're taking us into the kitchen, and that's how we started.
Now we will hear from some students on what it was like for them to interview Holocaust survivors. Some of these students were put in touch with local Holocaust survivors by Bluma Zuckerbrot Finkelstein of the Memphis Jewish Federation. Others interviewed relatives and family friends.
Hi, my name is Darren Schwer, and I'm a sophomore here at Lausanne. My oral history project this year was a life-changing experience for me. Paula Kelman, the person I interviewed, was a survivor of the Holocaust who experienced the terrible wrath of the Nazis. Ms. Kelman grew up in a small city located in the great country of Poland. When she was only 12 years old, she was abducted from her house and taken into a ghetto, not so far from her hometown. After being in the ghetto for a little while, she was sent to a later camp that was run by the German armaments company called Hasag. And it was a satellite of the concentration camp known as Buchenwald. She is so strong and always smiling. Her energy and positive attitude surprised me because I thought that the terrible weight of everything she saw would be so depressing. My interview with Mrs. Calvin made me realize the importance of not taking life and freedom for granted and to always keep my head up during tough times. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kelman, for letting me hear your story, and hopefully it will help others like help me.
Hi, my name is Spencer Mackey, and I am a sophomore here at Lausanne. My classmate B and Carly Nahon interviewed Sam Wyrish. Mr. Wyrish has a fascinating life story from growing up in Lodz, Poland, to being sent to the ghetto, and then to the worst of all death camps of Auschwitz, to finally being hunted by the Nazis in the forest as the war drew to a close. He is the last of all his brothers and sisters. He really impressed me as a strong-minded person who has a lot of courage and doesn't let anything stand in his way. He is also a fighter and is willing to do anything to survive and make sure others around him live to see another day as well. There was one story he told that stuck out in my mind. It was at one point during the Holocaust where he was in the woods with another soldier or man, and they were trying to escape. And he said he heard gun noises and gunshots and a lot of noises, so they didn't leave the woods until it was completely silent. Once they left, they saw a man with a uniform, and that's when they both knew that they were going to survive, because that man was an American soldier. His story taught me to keep pushing and never give up, even when things didn't go your way.
Hi, my name is Zach George, and this is Julia Sharp, who is my partner, but she couldn't be here today. We both are juniors at Lausanne. We had the opportunity to interview Mrs. Frida Weinreich. She grew up in Lodz, Poland, and she survived the Lodz ghetto, and and also during the horrors at Auschwitz. The Holocaust is one of the most sobering events in human history. It is hard to even think about how evil the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler was. The ability to do such terrible things to so many innocent people is really stunning. Being able to hear a first-hand account from an actual survivor really put things in perspective for me. One moment in my interview stuck with me and really made me reflect on my life. It was one of the hardest things to hear as well. Mrs. Weinreich responded to one of my questions about how many siblings she had, saying that none of them survived. Hearing those words was horrifying and made me think of all the times I wish my sister would leave me alone because of how annoying she was, or because maybe she was messing with me. These annoyances are small compared to the big picture of how important our families really are to us, how important our families really are to us, and how hard it is when you lose somebody close.
Last year, Lausanne Collegiate School's Chapman Woodbury Oral History Program embarked on an amazing journey into the realm of historical monument preservation and website development with a unique community partnership known as the Memphis Belle Memorial Website Project. Some concerned citizens in 1946 bought the famous World War II B-17F bomber, the Memphis Belle, for $350 from a Navy scrapyard, flew it to Memphis and had it parked in several locations around the city as one of the iconic planes of the war and a symbol of what Memphis gave to the World War II. In 1976, a group of veterans and other civic-minded individuals in Memphis took on the monumental task of preserving and maintaining the plane. This group, which called itself the MBMA, or Memphis Belle Memorial Association, fought a historic battle for many decades to preserve the plane against the vagaries of time and vandalism from whatever private resources they could muster. They also created a website to preserve the history of the plane and educate young people in the city about the story of this bomber and its crew.
As time wore on, demands of upkeep on the plane and the website began to become difficult to manage for the members of the MBMA. In 2005, the MBMA allowed the National Museum of the United States Air Force to come down and take the plane back to their facility for restoration. They also began to look for an organization to carry on the upkeep of the website. When one of the MBMA board members, Jerry Klein, approached the school, Dr. Johnson was tasked with finding some tech-savvy students who would revamp and transfer their website over to the school's website. Some intrepid students, under his supervision, took on the task and created a beautiful website, which was unveiled in December of 2012, complete with a history of the Belle and a digital primary source archive for researchers who are interested in the sources that the MBMA had gathered. This is a unique undertaking, the likes of which we have not seen anywhere else in the country. The students who are involved in this project through the Chapman Woodbury Oral History Project serve in effect as a web consulting firm, getting requests from the MBMA and the community and putting together a marvelous education resource, digital archive, community outreach project that has no parallel anywhere else as far as we can tell. Our two webmasters from this year are Jackson Slum and Ethan Fox, are here to describe what they have been doing to update and expand this website.
Hello, my name is Jackson Slum, and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. I've been the webmaster of the Memphis Belle site for nearly 2 years now. This year we've been working to improve what we've already created for the site. We met with the MBMA early this year and discussed their plans for what we wanted to do this year. To that end, I've been working on improving navigation a bit, specifically adding a new column to bring attention to updated pages. I've also added an interview that was conducted by my friend in the same grade as me, colleague named Jack Gallup, one of my classmates. The interview is of Andy Pouncey, who's done a great deal of work for the Memphis Belle Memorial Association as a part of updating the website's Volunteer Spotlight section. We're working on reviving the Volunteer Spotlight page to honor all of those who have contributed so much to the MBMA over the years, and we should have that finished by the end of the year. We've also added footage of the Belle's 1980 pavilion dedication ceremony on Mud Island at the request of the MBMA. The video became available to us due to the generosity of the Memphian Jimmy Ogle, general manager of Mud Island during the original fundraising campaign and pavilion dedication in the 1980s. Mr. Oldwell first heard of the effort of the students at Lausanne Collegiate School to commemorate the bell and Margaret Polk at the groundbreaking ceremony of the Margaret Polk statue in Overton Park in November 2010. He provided us with a VHS tape that was 25 years old to reproduce the website. It contained an oral history interview with Margaret Polk, the real Memphis Belle. In general, aside from conducting interviews, adding historical footage, and improving navigation, we've also been attempting to add some historical data and make updates that have been brought to our attention. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ethan Fox, and I'm a sophomore at Lausanne Collegiate School. This year so far, I've been working on the Memphis Belle Memorial Association's website based on the Lausanne School domain name. So far, I've edited a great video of an interview with the original Memphis Belle, Margaret Polk, so that Jackson could put it up on the website. And I've attempted to get recognition for our website by getting it linked to a network of museums across the country and around the world, including the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force, the D-Day Museum, the National World War II Museum, the Museum of Flight, the American Air Museum in Duxford, the Kansas Aviation Museum, the San Diego Air and Space Museum, the United States Army Aviation Museum, the Historic Aviation Museum, Memorial Museum, the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia, and the Tower Museum at Bassingbourn, UK, World War II home of the Belle. The experience so far has been wonderful, and I've learned so much of the history behind the Memphis Belle plane itself. One of the best sources of information so far have been the people at the Memphis Belle Memorial Association, who are phenomenal in their terms of depth and knowledge, and they were able to point us in the right direction. Working and building the content of the website has been a very worthwhile experience for me. Thank you.
And now we will have a montage of clips from just a few of the many Korean War and Vietnam War veterans interviewed that we did this year. This montage was put together by Lausanne Junior Edward Feinstein.
So the term search and destroy, that's where it came from.
What were the Viet Cong like?
The Viet Cong, what they liked in training, or what they liked formal military skills and training, they made up with dedication. They were very dedicated. They were South Vietnamese with allegiance, sworn allegiance to the North Vietnamese and the North, and the Reconstruction of the South, and uniting the two countries back together. The Viet Cong were highly motivated. They were ingenious with their ideas of booby traps and pushes. They were highly trained by General Chip's forces, who was one of the greatest jungle tacticians. He was the military man in charge of the North Vietnamese. His people trained the South Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, and they were highly skillful. And General Chip, again, was one of the best jungle tacticians the world has ever known.
What kind of
I say that from experience.
What kind of equipment did you use when you were in the jungle and on patrols?
Our basic patrol combat equipment was the M14. I'm talking back in 1966 and early 67. We carried the M14 rifle, 7.62 millimeter, and grenades, ammunition. The average Marine carried 8 to 12 clips of ammo, 20-round clips. We carried 6 to 12 hand grenades per Marine. You had an M60 machine gun assigned with each platoon, but sometimes we'd have 2 machine gun teams, 4-man teams assigned. We carried our Claymore knives. We were well equipped. We were well equipped. Your payload or your combat mode would vary from day to day, week to week, depending on what your mission, assigned mission was.
So the equipment was reliable?
Oh yes, highly reliable.
How did you feel when you were in the jungle on patrols from day to day?
We stayed motivated by motivating ourselves and a bonding between the
guess we were in the mountains and we got fired upon. We got a few casualties. And there were another time when we were actually set up an ambush. And just looking at what was going on, it was just frightening because in setting up that ambush, I could see, even though it was called the enemy, that guy that's on the other side didn't stand a chance because you had machine guns and all kinds of stuff that aimed at one person. So those things kind of get branded in your mind.
I think actually just being in the Marine Corps, because it's an old adage. I think it's been kind of true in my case that there are no such things. There's no such thing as a formal Marine. Once you are, you're always. Yeah. We stopped in Japan, probably, so that was a company. We stopped. We had to get off the ship. This is kind of, no amenities, whatever. The bunks were stacked, I recall, even 4 or 5 feet high. The guy on the bottom, he was about that tall, about 6 inches off the floor. And they stacked. If you're on the top, you got 5 over 360 on top. That wasn't good. Most people, including myself, had never been to sea before, so there was seasickness with Francis. What I think that I remember is there was a hand that I do remember. The ship had no freshwater distillation. The only water that you had was what they carried on board in the tank.
What was your job?
I started out in supply. We called it clothing exchange facility. And what we would do is someone would bring us a tattered uniform and we would exchange the shirt, pants, something like that. Boots. And about 2 months later, maybe 3 months, one of our other lieutenants rotated back home and he got out. And I went into what is called range registration. So we processed the dead bodies. We say it straight out, we processed the dead bodies, which we refer to as remains, respectfully. The local hospitals, there were 2 evacuation hospitals where injured soldiers were taken. If they did not survive in those hospitals, we bring the remains to our facility where we did the administrative handling, making sure all paperwork was correct, and making sure we had the right individual to go back to their families. And then we transported the remains with all the paperwork to the what was Thompson Air Base in Saigon, which had a full mortuary, so they could do autopsies there if they were necessary, and they do all the processing back home. But our original paperwork was the key to now sending the remains to the proper families.
Do you ever wish you did something else besides
No, in retrospect, it was an incredible learning experience. I had the opportunity to work with some really wonderful people. People who were skilled, I had licensed
Now we will hear from students on what it was like for them to interview veterans of the Korean War and the war in Vietnam. Some of these students went on a field trip to a retirement community near Lausanne called Kirby Pines Retirement Community to interview a number of veterans there who were interested in sharing their stories. Others interviewed relatives and family friends.
Hello everyone, my name is Gabe Kisber and this is Sean Motazanian, and we are both juniors here at Lausanne. Sean and I had the opportunity to interview a Korean War veteran named Bob Fowler at Kirby Pines Retirement Community. Bob Fowler joined the Marines in 1952 when he was in college and was sent to fight in the Korean War. While there, he became a master sergeant and worked in the repair camp. He protected many soldiers by repairing their weapons and making sure they could defend themselves on the front lines. Interviewing Sergeant Fowler about this experience and many of his stories was a great honor for us. My friend Sean and I want to thank Sergeant Fowler for his service and the courage he had to defend this great nation.
Hi, my name is Phoebe O'Connor, and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. It was an honor and a privilege to be able to interview Norris Marcus, the Vietnam veteran. I learned so many things that I would not have acquired from a textbook when I spoke with him. The things he and a lot of Vietnam veterans accomplished and sacrificed for our country were unbelievable. They deserve much more recognition than they often get. I'm so happy that I had the honor to conduct an interview with Mr. Marcus and share it with many others through our donation to the Library of Congress.
Hello, my name is Tyler Finn, and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. In our history classes, we learned a basic understanding of wars and some specific battles as well. I remember what happened in battles we fought with enemies like the Sioux Indians, and what happened in battles in World War II. But nothing can compare to a first-hand encounter from someone who experienced these battles. My buddy Nick Barbarito and I were able to get these kinds of stories from the person we interviewed this year, Mr. David Yoki. Mr. Yoki served in the Vietnam War as a tunnel rat. This involved him venturing into very dangerous tunnel created by the Viet Cong to look for papers and the VC themselves. The personal stories he told us of his experiences are of course something you can't learn in the textbook. Nick and I would both like to thank David Yoki for allowing us this opportunity and an experience we'll never forget.
We will now see Tyler Finn and Nick Bomarito's National History documentary on the Vietnam War titled Fire in the Hole, the Impact of American Demolition Teams in the Vietnam War. This documentary competed at the National History Day West Tennessee Regional Contest at the University of Memphis.
The Vietnam War started when American President Dwight D. Eisenhower tried to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The French had lost the First Indochina War, and it looked like Ho Chi Minh, who led the Vietnamese to victory but was a leftist, was going to win a national election set for 1956. Eisenhower intervened by having the CIA stage an early election in 1955, which put a pro-American president into power named Ngo Dinh Diem.
Ho Chi Minh reactivated his Vietnamese networks of freedom fighters in the south to attack the South Vietnamese government and supplied them with weapons from the northern part of Vietnam. They were called the Viet Cong. At first, the United States sent over troops to supervise, and that was the start of the American involvement. John F. Kennedy sent over a specialized group of military personnel called the Green Berets to train the South Vietnamese troops. The South Vietnamese kept getting beaten by the Viet Cong in battles like Pau Pau.
Then once Lyndon B. Johnson took office, American involvement in the war increased dramatically. First, American bombers began blowing up the supply lines from the north to the south in an attempt to cut the supply lines to the VC known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
When the Viet Cong began attacking the airfields in response, Johnson sent in the first regular ground troops, the Marines, to protect the airfields. President Johnson then decided to go into Vietnam and finish the VC for the South Vietnamese and picked William Westmoreland to lead American forces in Vietnam. Westmoreland came up with a strategy known as Search and Destroy to draw the Viet Cong out of hiding. This was where American soldiers were sent out on patrol in jungle areas as bait, and when they were attacked by the Viet Cong, the American soldiers would respond with massive firepower and airstrikes to try to kill as many VC as possible.
Westmoreland kept track of the VC body count and hoped that he would eventually wipe out all of the VC fighters in each sector through attrition. The Viet Cong responded by setting booby traps through the jungle to maim and kill as many American soldiers as possible, often using IEDs or improvised explosive devices to kill unsuspecting American soldiers. They also had extensive underground tunnel networks that were used to surprise American troops.
Let's take a closer look at the booby traps that the Viet Cong set for American troops. The Viet Cong would primarily get these materials to create IEDs from unexploded American ordnance, such as bombs, bullets, shells, grenades, landmines, and naval mines. Not only were these makeshift bombs used on soldiers, tanks, trucks, and cars, but also on riverboat vehicles as well. The American forces created a special division of the Army for destroying these deadly weapons. The demolition team, or the American version of the bomb squad, were used for these dangerous missions. An important member of the demolition team was the Taliban. Since the 1940s, during the war against the French colonial forces, the Viet Cong had underground complexes for their needs. By the 1960s, there were underground hospitals, training grounds, storage facilities, headquarters, and more. Since they were guerrilla warfare specialists, the Viet Cong called these tunnels their homes. The tunnel networks were especially numerous and complex in an area north of Saigon, known as the Iron Triangle. American forces tried to wipe out the VC hiding in these tunnel networks in campaigns like Operation Crimp and Operation Cedar Falls.
The Cu Chi tunnels were huge tunnel complexes that were a part of an even bigger tunnel system that was under most of Vietnam. Since the first strategy for destroying these complexes was to destroy them with explosives and chemicals, this was something that demolition teams were called in to attack in areas where airstrikes were not possible. The issue that South Vietnamese and American forces faced was how big the underground tunnel systems were at Tu Chi. The operation began in January 1966, where B-52 bombers dropped 30 tons of explosives in jungles to destroy the Cong. Along with that, 8,000 troops were deployed to look for evidence and clues for their strategies or other documents. One problem the soldiers faced was they were underestimating the size of the tunnels, and when they would try to flush out the Viet Cong, ventilation systems and trapdoors would allow them to escape. When tunnel rats would be deployed to search these tunnels, booby traps would be waiting for them in the darkness. American troops were extremely frustrated with the lack of success in these tunnels and could not fully take them over. The demolition team would be called onto different sites during all hours of the day to mark roads that were suspected to have IEDs on them. This would be a very dangerous situation for these troops to be in because of the risk of causing an explosion with a wrong step. The IEDs created by the Viet Cong could either be extremely sensitive or unstable. Along with this, tripwires could be very difficult to detect since the main tool used would be a metal detector, and the tripwire could be many feet away from the actual ordnance itself. Being extremely cautious was the first thing soldiers on demolition teams learned. This would cause the privates to spend countless hours digging holes to uncover dangerous, unstable bombs. They would then either defuse these bombs in a safe manner or detonate them in a safe proximity. David Yoki, a member of a demolition team in the Vietnam War, speaks about his life as a tunnel rat and demolition team member.
When you're demolition, which you end up doing, you end up sweeping the road for mines, exploding, detonating mines and so on. So we were constantly out in the field on call, so to speak. Every time there was a CAV unit or someone out in the field, they would call the engineers and say, we need demolition guys out there. We'd have mine detectors and go down the road. If anything, you spent a lot of time taking up lumps of metal over in the road. But they would definitely locate mines.
Once you found a mine, did you get a different team to get into?
No, we would take and depending on, for instance, one time it was taking so much time on this one road because we're finding so many mines. That the tank carried the CAF commander just said, you have to go faster than this. He said, we can't go any faster than this. He says, we'll just take it mark it. So we were putting helmets on them while we were driving around. And one of those, actually one of the personnel carriers hit him trying to push so yeah, there were a lot.
And then what was your next step in the military ladder, demolition, and then?
Well, actually, that was it. The quote-unquote tunnel rat guys, they were, most of us started off in demolition. And then, we would end up going down in wells and looking for offshoot tunnels and so on, or the regular Army guys would run into the tunnel and somebody would have to go in and check it out and blow it up, things like that. So you really needed the demolition experience.
A famous booby trap was known as the grenade can. It consisted of a hand grenade with the safety pin removed and the safety lever compressed. The grenade would then be placed in a container, usually a tin can, with a tripwire attached to the grenade. The grenade in a can would then be rigged up to a gate or fence so that when a soldier would open said gate or fence, the grenade would detonate.
These traps would often be found inside tunnels, which lay under Vietnam.
What was the first tunnel like that you explored?
It was, the first one was not one of these big complexes like you hear about underground. It was pretty much just a hiding place with a camouflage flap over the entrance. You had to crawl into the thing, and then it expanded once you got in. And, it was not long, not forever. It was just a place for them to go and get out of sight.
What would you do once you were inside the tunnels?
Well, normally we blow it up.
So you wouldn't even go all the way in?
Oh, I was never one of the ones that went, into one of these huge complexes and looked for information and all this type of thing. Number one was make sure no one's in there. If you don't run into any obstacles, people or otherwise, just go ahead and blow the thing up. So they can't use it.
Since the demolition team would set the huts or tunnels on fire, it led the Vietcong to create a booby trap called the rubber band grenade. This consisted of a stock grenade with a pin pulled and a strong rubber band wrapped around the safety lever to compress it. When the hut or tunnel would be set on fire or later flooded with chemicals, the rubber band would melt, releasing the safety lever and causing the grenade to explode. This would cause bamboo shrapnel and metal to riddle the American soldiers, killing and wounding many men. The American military's use of demolition experts to defuse explosive devices and clear Vietcong tunnels ensured the success of many search and destroy operations during the Vietnam War. Their efforts were a turning point in the American military's attempt to win the war.
And now we'll have a montage of clips, just a few of the many civil rights movement interviews we did this year. This montage was put together by Lausanne Jr., Rebecca Hamilton.
If your dad would have let you become more involved, what do you think you would have done?
I would have been right there with Martin Luther King. There is a better way than hate. It really is better. And I would have been right by his side. If I hadn't been old enough, I would have traveled wherever I could with him and been with everybody else. get this movement to occur a little bit sooner.
What was that perfect time?
I think it was 6 o'clock in the evening to 6 the next morning.
So after that, you're not allowed to go out anymore?
Nobody was allowed to go out.
Even though ones were?
No, nobody, because Martin Luther King had died. They had troops in the city, and everybody was affected by this. You know, it didn't give anybody any freedom to do anything. And we don't realize that as a people. When you lock me down, you lock yourself down. Because whatever you do to me that causes me to be down, it's going to trickle down and affect you too.
After reviewing my recent description of Little Rock 9, do you feel that this account is the same as actually being there?
Absolutely not. The media, portray Little Rock 9 as being all over me, the whole school fighting against Little Rock 9. That's not true. We had 2,000 students in a high school that was 2 blocks long and 5 stories high. It's a big school. But we had about 1,800 students or more, and they always have a certain group of bullies or different people in the high school, and that's some of the ones that cause the problem. But most of the problem is on the outside. Sometimes the money, when they try to stand up, for any of them, their families got threatened, they got threatened, You had this mentality outside there now, where it came from, from someplace, a lot of them, and would cause stress. Well, the parents were scared of the safety of some of their kids.
There was a blanket on the bed in the boarding house room where he was staying. And he basically, from what we can tell, he didn't expect to see King out on the balcony as quickly as he saw him. So he went ahead and took advantage of it and shot him a lot faster and a lot quicker than he thought he was. He wasn't there for a while. He fires the shot, goes back to his room, throws everything on the bed, wraps it up, and goes running outside. He comes out the building, and I don't know if you've been down there, it's on Main Street, across the street from the Royal Motels building. There's like a small street between the two, and then you have the boarding house building that fronts out on Main Street. He comes out the building, his car was parked down the street a little bit from the front door. And then he comes out and sees a police car parked at the fire station, so he has the gun and everything in his hands, he just throws it down, gets in his car and drives off. And again, I think that the closest we're going to come to knowing why he did it is probably what the House Select Committee on Assassinations came up with in '77 when they had their hearing. And what they said was there was a group in St. Louis who were white supremacists. They wanted King killed, and they said they would pay $50,000 to anybody who killed King. That was common knowledge in certain parts of Missouri, including at the prison where Ray was an inmate. So, and some of these individuals who were active in this group hung out in a bar that was run by Ray's brother. So they were traveling in the same circle as these individuals. The House Select Committee feels like that they know that the King, Ray knew that was on the table. And so that was his motivation for killing King. That when he had the opportunity, when he decided to do it, he figured he would assassinate him, and then he would be able to do it.
Now we will hear from some students on what it was like for them to interview people who participated in the Civil Rights Movement. Some of these students interviewed people referred to them by Barbara Andrews, the Education Director at the National Civil Rights Museum. Others interviewed relatives and family friends.
Hi, my name is Jack Gallup, and this is Michaela Mantero, and we are juniors here at Lausanne. John Campbell is the Shelby County District Attorney and is a judge at the Memphis Civil Court on 201 Poplar. He was on the James Earl Ray case in the 90s, the suspected killer of American civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr.
He still lives in Memphis and remains an important eyewitness to the evidence, the investigation, and the trial of James Earl Ray for the killing of Martin Luther King. We learned a lot about the details of the assassination that we hadn't heard anywhere before. Information like that just isn't in a textbook.
We would like to thank Mr. John Campbell for giving us the opportunity to interview him about his involvement in the case regarding Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination.
It was very interesting to be able to get an inside look from someone who was working on the case. We are grateful that we had the chance to speak with him about such an important event in history.
Hi, my name is Iman Isse, and I am a current junior here at Lausanne Collegiate School, and I received the opportunity to interview Memphis civil rights icon Alvin Turner. He played a significant role in the Memphis sanitation workers strike, and while laboring under harsh and unjust conditions, Mr. Turner knew that he would face retaliation, but felt as if it was his duty to stand up and fight for change. I learned about the civil rights movement and the sanitation strike from teachers and textbooks, but nothing compares to hearing the stories firsthand from a person who lived it themselves. When I walk through the Civil Rights Museum and see the displays and look at the pieces of history that they have collected, it gives what I'm seeing a different perspective. And I wanted to take what I had learned from Mr. Turner and look at Dr. King's assassination from a different perspective. And that's what my partners and I did in our National History Day documentary. So I just want to thank Mr. Alvin Turner again for his time and for sharing his stories with us. It was an unforgettable experience.
Now we will see Iman Isse, Sidney Cleanscales, Robert Bonner, and Tanner Fuquay's short documentary on the civil rights movement called Killing the Dream, the Memphis sanitation workers strike, and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It won third place at National History Day West Tennessee Regional Contest at the University of Memphis and qualified to go to the state competition in Nashville.
I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. True revolution values will lay hands on the world order and say of war. This way of settling differences.
Martin Luther King was born January 15th, 1959 in Atlanta, Georgia, where his mother was a school teacher and his father was a well-known pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Martin Luther King was your average American boy. He grew up enjoying baseball, attended church every Sunday, and was an academic scholar. What made him stand out from other kids his age was his ability to see the world in a different light. He didn't like the unjust and unfair racial oppression he and other African Americans were subject to, so he decided to dedicate his entire life to making a change. Dr. King was known for his ability to never give up under any circumstance, no matter its size. He dedicated his life to achieving equality and justice for all Americans, despite skin color, beliefs, and ethnic backgrounds. Dr. King believed that nonviolent retaliation to unjust laws was the best way to bring about social change. Martin Luther King helped change America. He had millions of Americans behind him in his fight, and his strong leadership and extraordinary power of speech gave people faith and courage to keep working peacefully, even when the odds were against them. On the other hand, his ability to bring about change was intimidating. Many whites were not fond of the idea of racial equality. They wanted to preserve the supremacy they once created over other races, and saw Martin Luther King as a large obstacle standing in the way. Martin Luther King had to live every day in constant fear for the lives of he and his family. His push for social change caused him to become victim to daily death threats and even bombs being thrown into his home. Nothing was able to stop Dr. King in his desire to change the world until April 4th of 1968 at exactly 6:01 p.m., where he was gunned down by James Earl Ray at the Lorraine Motel located in downtown Memphis. Dr. King was standing on the balcony right outside of his motel room, where he was gunned down by a .30 caliber rifle, where the bullet pierced his right cheek and traveled through his neck. Martin Luther King was later rushed to the emergency room, where he was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of the second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck.
Death was followed by heartache, violence, and controversy. The African-American community was devastated that he was dead. Hundreds of blacks fled the streets across the United States, resulting in crime and massive waves of riots. The entire world was in shock that the father of the civil rights movement and the man who was finally leading the country to equality was gone. The only thing more shocking than Dr. King's death were facts that came about almost 3 decades later.
After research done on Dr. King's alleged killer, James Earl Ray, suspicion began to rise. Dr. King's assassination was said to be almost too perfect to be true. A racist criminal was able to trail a well-protected African-American civil rights leader, murder him, then is able to escape in an almost perfect getaway, but ends up dropping his murder weapon, covered with his own fingerprints, and his personal radio, with his entire name stamped on it. The killer is either one of two things: extremely inexperienced, or James Earl Ray was not behind the killing of Dr. Martin Luther King.
It became questionable how James Ray, who was a high school dropout and Army throwaway, could commit the crime of killing the most influential man of the civil rights movement and elude international manhunt for over 6 weeks. Questions began to pop up. How does one explain that Ray was found in an upscale 4-star hotel in London? Who had provided Ray with an excellent passport with a new name and flight ticket? And how does one explain the $50,000 United States dollars found with him in London? How did this lower-class Southern man from Alton get his hands on such things? In 1977, Dr. King's son had a meeting with James Earl Ray where they discussed the shooting of his father. The King family believes the government's motivation to murder Dr. King was to prevent his campaign in Washington, D.C. protesting the Vietnam War and the lack of resources put forward to ending poverty. The FBI has never been a fan of critics. King became an official enemy of state. Agents tracked his every move were forming a, quote, complete analysis of the avenues of approach aimed at neutralizing King as an effective Negro leader. When a wiretap revealed King's extramarital affair, the FBI sent him an anonymous letter predicting that blackmail was in his future. You are a colossal fraud, and an evil, vicious one at that, the letter stated.
From March 13, 1969, until the day of James Ray's death in 1998, he continued stating that he was only an innocent scapegoat, used to cover the actual details to a government conspiracy. He believed that he had been tricked at the very last minute by a deceitful attorney offering to represent him into entering a guilty plea instead of going to trial as planned. It took Dr. William F. Pepper 20 years after Dr. King's death, finally in 1988, to finally come to the conclusion that James Ray was indeed telling the truth.
And after 10 years of deep investigation and numerous trips visiting Memphis, William Pepper was convinced, and therefore he agreed to represent James Earl. Later, in 1995, he published the book titled Orders to Kill, which is a book detailing the conspiracy. The book was highly ignored, but was looked into closely by Dr. King's family. After the family was done studying all of the evidence and speaking many times about the case of Dr. Pepper, they too became convinced that James Ray was an innocent bystander and that the conspirators who actually murdered Dr. King were largely to blame.
Martin Luther King's son, by the name of Dexter Scott, had a meeting with James Earl in March of 1997. He asked James Ray bluntly, "Did you kill my father?" And James Ray replied, "No. No, I did not. No." As awkward as it may seem, I believe you, and my family believes you, and we will do everything in our power to see you prevail, Dexter responded.
In February of 1977, Dr. King's family joined Mr. Ray in seeking a trial. Dexter King and his mother, Coretta Scott King, testified on his behalf where they seeked a full and fair trial. One difficult order of business was trying to get James Ray a liver transplant, which was desperately needed in order for him to live long enough to see his trial. Even though he had Dr. King's own family on his side, the request to grant James Ray travelability to Pittsburgh was constantly denied. It would have cost the state no money at all to allow James Ray travel. Dexter King stated that was equivalent to signing his death warrant. March 11, 1998, James O. Ray fell into a deep coma where he passed away 44 days later, never being able to attend his trial.
His last words before dawn were as stated, "I am anxiously awaiting a ruling from the Tennessee Court of Appeals. All I ever wanted was a fair trial and the opportunity to call witnesses on my behalf and cross-examine the state's witnesses. Before I die, I want the chance to prove my innocence. The country and the King family deserve the trial as much as I do to find out the truth and to bring the real assassin to justice."
The trial finally ended in Memphis on November 15, 1999, and was in session until December 8. After testimonies were heard from 70 different witnesses, it took the jury just over an hour to find that Dr. King was in fact murdered as a result of a conspiracy involving Lord Jowers and others, including governmental agencies. Jowers was declared liable for King's death for having hired a Memphis police officer to assassinate Dr. King. Finding out that government agencies and others were also involved, the jury in the wrongful death case essentially accepted the plaintiff's argument that James O. Ray was indeed telling the truth and found not guilty. Do you think the racial tension has died down?
Well, we've come a long way from what we were, but we still got a long way to go. We shall overcome someday.
We would now like to recognize our veterans for what they did for all of us.
Hello, my name is Henry Fuqua and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. My grandfather, Thomas Fuqua, was a Korean War veteran and won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery in battle. He was the last man standing in the gunfight. I just want to thank all of you veterans like my grandfather that were brave, and we wouldn't have the freedom that we do today if it weren't for you and your bravery. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hamilton. I'm a junior here at Lausanne. On behalf of Lausanne, I want to thank all of the veterans who served our country. We would not live the lives we are living today without your dedication to our country. We have freedom today because of you. Your work has not gone unnoticed, and we are all very appreciative. This program is dedicated to you because of your strength, bravery, and commitment to our country.
Hello everyone, my name is Trent Martin and I am a senior here at Lausanne. I would just like to say thank you to all the veterans in the audience. I am truly grateful for what you have done for me and particularly for my country. I appreciate all the effort that you have put in and the bravery you have showed when fighting for our country. Thank you so much for everything that you have done for this country and risking your lives to protect us. Your service made it possible for us to live in the safe country that we do today. Thank you for all that you have done.
Hi, my name is Andrew Murphy and I'm a junior here at Lausanne. Trent and I interviewed a man named Ernest Green. I feel that interviewing Ernest Green was an unforgettable experience. I've never met a man so generous and active at his age. Listening to him talk about his time in service really enlightened me on what it's like to help support your country. Ernest is a good man, and the fact that he supported his coacher makes him even more of a great American citizen. For all of you out there like Ernest who served, I just want to say thank you for what you did. It means a lot to all of us.
If you are here tonight and are a veteran, please stand. Let's give all of these veterans a brief round of applause.
We would now like to recognize all of our Holocaust survivors.
The amount of bravery, persistence, and faith that was revealed in Mrs. Weinreich's experiences at Auschwitz is truly inspiring. This inspiration led me to question myself and the problems that I face daily. These things I encounter are not even issues compared to what the millions of people who were in prison or killed by the Nazis faced. Mrs. Weinreich allowed me to see a more complete picture of the world and put my problems into perspective for me. There are far worse things in the world than the struggles we face here. I truly hope that Mrs. Weinreich knows how appreciative we here at Lausanne are for really opening up and revealing her story. We would like to thank her and the many others who have shared with us over the years. Your stories will help us teach future generations the lessons the world learned about letting men like Adolf Hitler get into power. We can never let that happen again. We must never forget.
If you're here tonight and are a Holocaust survivor, please stand. Let's give all of these brave survivors a huge round of applause.
We would now like to recognize our civil rights protesters. Memphis was one of the main theaters for the battle against racially driven inequality and mistreatment during the civil rights movement, and in some ways it still is. If it weren't for the determined and willing people like you, the protesters in the civil rights movement who fought the battle to ensure safety and equality and equal opportunity for themselves and for future generations, many of my friends and classmates wouldn't be able to learn alongside me here at Lausanne. I'm eternally grateful for the sacrifices you made that made this possible.
To stand up for African American civil rights during a time of white dominance in American history was a valiant thing, and that is why participants in the civil rights movement should be recognized and honored for their efforts. Whether one was part of a boycott or attended a sit-in in protest of the prejudice, each action defied discrimination against blacks and were stepping stones towards the final goal of racial equality.
We would like to say thank you to those involved in the movement and honor them for their bravery and determination. Thank you for all that you did. The outcome of your efforts changed the face of American history.
If you are here tonight and participated in the civil rights movement in any way, please stand. Let's give all of these brave protesters. We would now like to present medals to those who allowed us to interview them this year.
From World War II, Lieutenant George Bradford, United States Air Force, interviewed by Grace Dunlap and Joseph Williams.
Airman First Class Lynn Wood Burkhalter, United States Air Force, interviewed by Jackson Song.
Technical Sergeant Robert Eisman, United States Army, interviewed by Lyndon Warren and Reem Russell.
Petty Officer First Class Ernest Green, United States Navy, interviewed by Andrew Murphy and Trent Martin. Seaman First Class Buster McGuire, United States Navy, interviewed by Andrew Bates and Alice C.
Recruiting Sergeant Mabel Meck, United States Marines, interviewed by Alyssa Arnotvic.
Seaman First Class Bob Meredith, United States Navy, interviewed by Larry Starks and Alex Meade. Seaman First Class Richard Randall, United States Navy, interviewed by Taylor Boucher. Private First Class Holly Richardson, United States Marines, interviewed by Jackson Sloan, Trent Martin, Andrew Murphy, and Kevin Finn.
Sergeant Arthur Sandvig, United States Army, interviewed by Sarah Eunice.
Chief Petty Officer David Williamson, United States Navy, interviewed by Phoebe O'Connor and Jada Tate.
From the Holocaust, Paula Kelman, ghetto and Hashtag labor camp attached to Buchenwald, interviewed by Darren Schroeder. Frida Weinreich, Auschwitz, interviewed by Zach George and Julia Sharp. Sam Weinreich, Auschwitz, interviewed by Carly Stein and Spencer Mackey.
From the Korean War, Captain Steve Feinstone, United States Army medic, interviewed by Everett Feinstone and Madison Sims.
Master Sergeant Bob Fowler, United States Marines, interviewed by Sean Motizavian and Gabe Kisler. Staff Sergeant Paul Jones, United States Army, interviewed by Katie Fleet and Amanda Dominguez.
Specialist Third Class Tad Potts, United States Army, interviewed by Rebecca Hamilton and Maggie Smith. Captain Charles Parrott, MD, United States Army, interviewed by Amanda Domingos.
Chief Petty Officer Arnold Semch, United States Navy, interviewed by Amanda Dominguez and Tyler Finn. Corporal Howard Shelton, United States Army, interviewed by Frank Lee, Masaud Al-Abin, and Z Zhao.
Corporal Charles Woods, United States Army, interviewed by Rachel Ellis White.
From the Civil Rights Movement, Gilbert Arnold, Little Rock 9 classmate, interviewed by Samantha Johnson and Rebecca Hamilton.
Linda Brown, eyewitness to the Civil Rights era in Memphis, interviewed by Jennifer Quay and Robert Palmer. John Campbell, Assistant District Attorney for Shelby County and investigator on the James Earl Ray case regarding the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., interviewed by Jack Gallup and Michaela Rentero.
Lewis Dixon, eyewitness to Civil Rights era in Memphis, interviewed by Eli Stein and Adam Stiegler. Maxine Smith, NAACP local secretary who fought to desegregate schools and public facilities across Memphis, interviewed by Ray Patrick and I.
Paul Smith, ambulance driver who transported Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. after he was shot, interviewed by Sarah Eunice, Barbara Williams, and Dr. Scott Johnson.
Alvin Turner, sanitation strike worker featured in the documentary I Am the Man, interviewed by Iman Issei and Sidney Klingscales.
From the Vietnam War, First Lieutenant Doris Marcus, United States Army, interviewed by Phoebe O'Connor and Marlon Byrne.
Sergeant Major David McWhorter, United States Marine, interviewed by Spencer Dennis. Colonel William Shetler, MD, United States Army medic, interviewed by Alyssa Arnautovic, Kenner Smithers, Barbara Williams, and Dr. Scott Johnson.
Sergeant Samuel Tate, United States Army, interviewed by Jada Tate and Simone Bridgewater. Private First Class David Yoki, United States Army, interviewed by Tyler Finn and Nick Bomarito.
From Desert Storm, Staff Sergeant Oliver Henderson, United States Army, interviewed by Holly Henderson.
I'd just like to say that it is a privilege to work with a talented group of young people like this. I just want to give them a hand for all they've done. They interviewed people and uncovered everyday heroes, people that we meet and we have no idea that they rescued somebody, they saved someone's life, they stood up and stopped discrimination. It's just, every year, it's amazing the stories that we find. And some of them even took what they learned and put together a new synthesis of history. Something that you don't normally hear in your history textbook. So it was another great journey this year. Really proud of all of our students. And we want to make sure that we thank some people who helped our program this year. Barbara Williams is a local contact for our program, and she has helped us find some people that we have done some really interesting interviews with. We want to make sure that we thank her. We want to thank the National Civil Rights Museum and Barbara Andrews, who pointed us to a number of great civil rights interviews. We would also like to thank the Memphis Jewish Federation for their efforts in helping us to find Holocaust survivors, and we would also like to thank Kirby Pines once again this year for allowing us access to all of their veterans. We do have refreshments out and back, and we thank you for coming, and we're done.